All right, today I'm going to talk about this book, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and why I think we should read atypical books, or books that don't follow the conventions of their genres. The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. It's a quite well-known novel. You may have already read it yourself, or you're at least interested in it if you found this. So it's a kind of fictionalized memoir or a memoirized piece of fiction. It's hard to tell the difference, and that's kind of one of the points here. It's set during the Vietnam War, and it follows the experiences of a character named Tim O'Brien and the platoon that he's been assigned to, and their experiences in the Vietnam War, as well as some of the experiences of some of the soldiers before and after the war. So it's really just a set of interconnected short stories, and it's a non-linear kind of book. So that in itself is pretty unique, I think, especially for a war novel, at least that I know of. And of course, this is the internet, so someone will correct me and tell me I'm wrong. So the title, The Things They Carried, is also the title story here. And it refers to the literal objects that they carry, so all their weapons, their equipment, everything that they need while they're out on patrol or while they're out on a mission and things like that. But it also refers to the intangible things that they carry, so the things that they take with them when they go to war, their memories, their fears, their guilt, their love, and then the things they sort of collect emotionally, the emotional baggage they collect while they're there. A lot of that, of course, is trauma. But of course, there's also friendship, there's loss of friends die, and things like that. So through the experiences of the fictionalized version of Tim O'Brien and his fellow soldiers, the book really examines themes of courage, of course. It's hard to write a war story without courage. But it focuses much more on memory and on loss, and surprisingly on the ambiguity of truth, particularly truth when telling stories, when telling our own personal stories, our own personal narratives, or when we're sort of recounting what happened. And I'm going to get to that in a bit. The narrative shifts quite a bit between combat scenes, reflections on the nature of war, the things that soldiers do when they're not fighting, when they're sort of waiting to fight, basically. Also, there are some stories, too, about preparing to go to war, some of the experiences. I'm going to talk about one of those stories. And, of course, soldiers' experiences after the war, which is a really significant experience of people who were involved with the Vietnam War. So by weaving all of these and kind of mixing all these things together, we get this haunting meditation on really the human cost of war and of conflict. And I have to say that it's a very raw, it's a very emotional book, and it uses a really innovative approach to storytelling. And that's really made it an outstanding novel, and it's really kind of made it a classic American war novel. So talking about the narrative structure, it's a fragmented narrative structure, and I really liked this, and I think it works really well in this book because it really mirrors I guess I would say almost like the disorienting nature or the chaotic nature of war, and of fighting a war in a foreign country where you don't understand the culture, you don't understand the language, probably don't even understand the motivation of why we're there, or if you understand it, you don't agree with it, and that creates, of course, a lot of sort of discordant, like, why are we here, that kind of thing. You don't really believe in what you're doing. But also, too, I think it on a higher level or on a different level, using the fragmented narrative structure also really reflects the nature of memory and of our mind and of how we remember things, how we recall things, and how we process things, particularly traumatic things like death, or like even more traumatic, witnessing the death of a colleague or a friend. And that's something that comes up very quickly and is repeated throughout the book. There is a soldier who, I'm not going to give away any plot or anything here, but there is a soldier who is quite suddenly shot through the head, just like seemingly out of nowhere. He's killed, and we're not engaged in a fight, and so that it's very disorienting. They're not sure what's going on and all that. And as we move through the book, and as that moment when that soldier is shot is revisited again and again, and more details come out, or some more backstory about what was happening are sort of retold. And as we move through it, as we uncover those things, we start to think like, oh, okay, we're going to get to the truth. We're going to find out what really happened and who is really responsible and, what is really going on here. But then we get more and more. And then you come to the conclusion that you're never going to get the real truth, that everyone has their own version of the story. And perhaps the truth of it is just not really important. Perhaps what's really important is who's telling the story, how they're telling the story, and why they're telling the story. So the details of it are maybe not as important as the angle and the frame of reference and all of that. So it's very, very interesting. Also, too, the nonlinear approach. I think it's nonlinear, but there's also lots of repetition, which is really interesting. So there's repeated phrases, repeated events, repeated things, repeated actions that were happening at all the different points of time. And it also, that kind of creates that sort of repetitive nature of a soldier's life and a soldier's experiences, and the sort of like monotony of war. We often think of war as, something very brave and courageous and exciting, heart-pounding action and things like that. But there was a lot of just kind of waiting around. There was a lot of going from place to place and things like that. So it's quite interesting. And one of the things that comes out while they're doing all that waiting, or while they're traveling or trekking or just waiting for something to happen, that's when they talk to each other, and that's kind of when the real stories come out. So again, and this is really, really good at doing that. That's to me, those were the more interesting parts of it. So talking about the prose, it's really well written on a prose level, on a sentence level. So I think like if you're a student of writing, you could do very well to study this book, because he's able to blend stark realism with also very lyrical passages. And the lyrical passages are not always limited to interior character monologues or introspective moments. Some of the more lyrical passages are actually descriptions of the settings that they're in the jungles in Vietnam, or in the little villages and some of the different places. So it's very well done. It really avoids a lot of the cliches that you find in typical war writing and war novels. And he's also he's able to sort of alternate between very vivid and sensory-laden descriptions that are not overly detailed, but still give you a sense of the physical reality of the place where they are and of the war that they're fighting. And then also these sort of very reflective passages that really probe the sort of emotional and existential moments, existential kind of crises that are really sort of weighing down on their minds and on their hearts, and that's really what's making everything really difficult for them. And difficulty is another thing that is a recurring theme here. So obviously the book is called The Things They Carried. So soldiers in Vietnam infamously had to carry way too much weight, which made everything difficult for them, and often was the cause of death. I mean, because they were slowed down, they could easily be shot by a sniper, or it could be hard for them to suddenly move quickly and get into place. So there's that sort of thing that's holding them down. But then there's also just what's going on in their minds and in their memories. sometimes daydreaming. It's not uncommon in the book for certain characters to die or to get shot while daydreaming or while just thinking of something. So, which is just like almost kind of, I guess, it's almost kind of a postmodern irony of death, that you are thinking about your life and then you lose your life at that moment. So there's that. One of the stories that I think to me was the story that really stood out is one called On the Rainy River. Did I get that title right? Yeah, On the Rainy River, which happens, it's very early in the book, and it's a recount of the moment or of the summer when the character of Tim O'Brien, who is also the author of Tim O'Brien, he receives his draft notice. He's at home in his hometown working in a meatpacking plant, and he hates it. And the descriptions of working in the meatpacking plant are just absolutely disgusting and also very accurate. But he receives his draft notice and he doesn't want to go, obviously. I mean, who really wants to go? He considers himself to be, anti-war. He's considering himself to be liberal, but he's living in a very conservative, small Minnesota town called, I want to say it's Hutchinson. Okay, don't get lost on that. But he's struggling with, he doesn't want to go, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. And he keeps ruminating over it and over it and over it and over it again, which again is something that he will do even while he is there and fighting in the war. And he's ruminating over it again and again and again. And he's trying to figure out, okay, how can I get out of this? And he just doesn't know what to do. And he comes up with different plans. And he starts to sort of imagine what he's going to tell his father and his family, or what he's going to say to people in the town where he's living. And he has sort of these imagined, stand-up moments where he's really going to tell everyone off, and he's going to do what's the right thing, but he can't do it. But he needs to do it. So he's struggling. Finally, one day, takes the keys to the car, he's got some money in his pocket, drives north. He's going to drive north to Canada, and he's not going to go to the draft, and he's not going to come back. He's going to leave everything behind. So he drives all the way up north, and there's a body of water that acts as the border between Minnesota and Canada. Sorry, I kind of struggled with that for a second. And it's too big to cross. He can't swim across it. So he doesn't know what to do. So he finds sort of this fishing resort. And there's an old man there. It's past the tourist season, and he's just sort of the groundskeeper, maintenance guy. He tells the guy, I want to rent a cabin for a couple of weeks, and almost immediately the old guy knows kind of what's going on here. So he lets him stay there for a couple of weeks, teaches him how to fish and sort of take care of everything, and they're sort of working together to sort of pack up the resort, close it down before winter comes, basically. And basically on the last day of all of this, the old guy wakes him up, they go out fishing, and he steers the boat within swimming distance of the Canadian shore. And then there's a moment there, and at this moment, Tim O'Brien, the character Tim O'Brien, has to finally make his decision. Is he going to go or not? Is he going to go across to Canada, or is he going to stay and then go to the draft and fight in the war? And he can't do it. He can't cross the border because his conscience gets the better of him. He realizes he can't face what shame that would bring to him and to his family. He just can't do it. So they go back in, they have dinner. The old guy basically pays him for all the work that he's done, gives him a little bit of extra money, and then he's off and he goes back home. And we know that he's not going to cross because this story is about a third of the way into the book. So we know he's already in the war. So why tell this story? Well, the reason to tell this story is to deepen the character and to show what he really went through. And I think that's what leads me to say that this book is atypical. is that this book uses a very metafictional approach by firstly blurring the line between memoir and fiction, and that allows him to focus, instead of telling a story of fighting and of trying to win the war, basically, or to save their lives and that kind of thing. It becomes an interior battle within the narrator, Tim O'Brien, and within the other characters around him. So we've got internal actions instead of external actions. And interestingly enough, aside from that story on the Rainy River, there's really no political commentary. And even within that story, there's not a lot of explicit political commentary. Typically in Vietnam War novels, and typically with a character who wants to go against the war, doesn't want to join the draft, we always imagine that this character will have, some sort of moment where there'll be political action, there'll be a rally, there'll be, you can cue the CCR, Fortunate Son soundtrack, all that kind of nonsense, that sort of prototypical Hollywood garbage. He doesn't go there. He just doesn't do that. It's really interesting. And his choice to fight or not fight is not based on a political choice. It's based on the impact that that's going to have on his family and his relationship with his family. So I think that's pretty profound and not very typical. So then now let's quickly talk about what makes a book atypical. I've got a few things here. Unique structure, which this book has. Unusual themes, which this book has. Challenging the reader, which this book has. The challenge being, this is not a action-packed novel of grunts in the jungle fighting a war. These are skinny guys. They're underfed. They're goofing around most of the time. They don't want to fight a war. They're not trained killers. They're not on a mission to take down Colonel Kurtz or anything like that. They're just living, basically just kind of being everyday soldiers. It breaks a lot of genre conventions like that, like I just said. Also, too, experimental characters would be atypical. So by blurring the line between memoir and fiction, and by placing himself in the story as Tim O'Brien, a character, that's very experimental. Blurring boundaries, again, blurring between memoir and fiction. So we can see that the things they carried is really an atypical war book, an atypical Vietnam War book. So why read it? Why read an atypical book? Why read a book that is unusual? It seems very strange, right? Why would you read a book that is maybe real or maybe not real? That might be his real experiences and may not be. Why would you do that? Well, it helps you challenge your perspective, and it helps you broaden and deepen your perspective on, it could be on specific events. It could also be on the experiences of people in different periods of time that you didn't experience yourself. Also, too, it can also help ignite your own creativity. Like I said, I think if you're a writer, you would do well to study this book. If not for the prose, you might find it inspiring. You can find that atypical books approach storytelling in unique ways, and that can help inspire you. Also, too, they deepen engagement. I find that when a book is kind of breaking boundaries or blurring boundaries or sort of using experimental techniques or blurring different kinds of genres and things like that, you engage with it on a deeper level because it's not what you're expecting. So your mind is kind of surprised. You engage with it on a little more of an intellectual level. And that goes back to the first point that I made of challenging your perspective. So if you're finding that you're kind of intellectually surprised, you're going to be more intellectually engaged with it, and you're going to find that you engage with it a lot deeper, and it's something that you carry with you and that you'll continue to think about even after you're finished with the book. Also, too, it helps you broaden your literary appreciation. Tim O'Brien is not a young writer. And this is not a new book. This was published in 1990. I'm ashamed to say that was quite a while ago now. So I remember when this book came out. but it helps you broaden your literary appreciation. Not all atypical books, not all experimental fiction is new. Contemporary doesn't always have to mean new. So in short, I think reading atypical books, it pushes you out of your reading comfort zone. It pushes you out of your intellectual comfort zone. And I think that's really important as a reader. It's good to read for pleasure, and it's good to read the things that you like. But it's just as good, if not better, to challenge yourself and to broaden your horizons, so to speak. You think you become a much more interesting reader, and you'll have more innovative literary experiences. You find, and I think then you'll find too that you're also willing to take on other things that are not quite so normal. So like different kinds of movies, different kinds of TV shows, even different kinds of games. Gaming can be a great storytelling method also. So there you go. Atypical books should be read. This book should definitely be read. The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. If you've made it this far, I'm obligated to ask you, if you have read this book and you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. Even if you didn't enjoy it, leave a comment below. Just be nice. And leave your thoughts about atypical books or books that don't normally fit within specific genres or conventions. Do you think that that's worth reading? And please tell me why or why not. So once again, my name is Carl. This has been Please Read Your Book, and I hope to see you again soon.